and welcome to another episode of All About Dat Base, the series where I show you how to make some awesome bases for your miniatures. Now, in today's episode, I'm going to be doing a slight spin on one of the bases that I showed on social media a few weeks ago. In that base, I made a slate bridge kind of over a little stream, and I had some grasses and flowers and things around it. But I decided that for the tutorial video, I was going to make this kind of a frozen frosty effect. So this way I can show you how to make that frosty effect and that appearance. And I'm going to be showing you how to make icicles and things like that. So it's slightly different to the base that you might have seen on my Facebook page, but the premise is exactly the same. You just get a few extra bits by watching this video. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, this is quite a time-consuming base. It's not my most time-consuming, but it's up there. So it really is a labour of love with some of these bases. So have a watch of the video, see what you think, and give it a go. And I'd love to hear from you if you do. If you try it and you like it, let me know how you got on. So let's head to the table and I will see you in a bit. So this is the effect we are going for. As I said at the beginning, this is going to be a winter version of this. But as you can see here, this bridge is made up of several layers of tiny pieces of slate. Now for this, I'm using Warlord Games Battlefields and Basing Slate. It's a few pounds for this tub. Now, I know that some of you might be thinking, well, you can just find slate out and about, and that's very true. However, I've really struggled to find tiny pieces of slate while I've been out walking. I can find nice big chunks, but can't find these little ones, which is why I bought that tub, but there's loads in there. It's going to last me a long time. So the first thing you're going to want to do is find a piece that's going to be your flat bit, the top bit of your bridge. And then you're going to want to start looking for these tiny, tiny slivers. So they're very thin and very small. Because what essentially we're going to do is we're going to stack these on top of each other and then put the bridge part on top. And you can do this with as many as you want. I find 4 or 5 of these little pieces usually works the best. So to prepare our base for this, we're going to be using my trusty old Vallejo white pumice. And let's just take some and start building up our base. Now, because this is going to have a little stream running through it, we want to build this up more so on the sides like this, and then having a dip in the middle. So let's get a decent amount, put that on there. And then just using the tip of it, just going to spread it out so that there is some texture in this middle bit. Like that. And then, just to make sure it looks like a kind of a babbling stream, we're going to take some very tiny rocks. These are just basing rocks that I found on eBay, and I'm just going to drop a couple of these into where the stream is going to be. And as I do in most of my videos, I'm using the pumice as the cement for these, so you don't have to glue them on. So I've just dropped a few of those in there. And then the next step is to start building the bridge. Now this is going to be done in a couple of stages. So for the first layer, I'm going to take the two biggest pieces and I'm just going to put them on either side of my stream and press them down ever so slightly into the pumice. And then you just need to let this dry for a good 12 hours or so. And then once that's dry, we can start putting these extra pieces on and building up the full height of the bridge. So now that the pumice has dried, the next thing we're going to want to do is build our bridge. We're going to do this a little step at a time. So I'm going to take my super glue and just put a little bit on each side, and then take the biggest of my slate chips and just push them on. And just give them a few seconds for the glue to dry. And then go on with the next one. And then onto the last layer. And then we're ready to put our top on. And we just hold that until the glue's taken. And there we go. Now we're ready for priming. So this has been primed in Mechanicus Standard Grey, but you can use any dark grey colour you want. And the next thing we're going to do is start painting the earth around the bridge. And for that, I'm simply going to apply a nice thinned coat of Steel Legion Drab. And I'm just using an old brush for this, just because this texture here is quite sharp and jagged, so I don't want to damage a good brush. So all you're going to do is paint everything that's not the bridge. So including these little rocks that we've added, and these little bits just in front of the bridge. And all around the sides as well. So I will finish that off and I'll be back in a minute. With the paint dry, the next step is to simply apply a liberal coat of Agrax Earthshade over the entire model. You want the Mechanicus Standard Grey to really get dark from this, and you want the wash to really pool in all of the recesses. Just helps to add to the contrast on the rock before you add your dry brushing. And then we're going to do the same on the earth bits as well. And you can see there that already just doing this is really bringing out the details of the texture that we've applied. So once that's all covered, you just want to give that a little bit of time to dry, and then we'll come back and start bringing out those details with some dry brushing. Next, we're going to dry brush the ground area and all through underneath the bridge. And for that, we're just going to use Citadel's Zandri Dust. So I'm going to get a little bit on my kitchen roll. I'm using quite a big dry brush for this because we want to get quite a lot of coverage here. So let's just get that on there, wipe off most of it. And then just liberally and quite heavily swipe your brush over everything that you've painted brown. As I say, you don't have to be particularly careful with this. We want this to be quite a heavy dry brush. There we go. Get most of that off, and now onto the rocks, and we're going to start with Citadel's Dawnstone. So again, we'll just work that into the bristles and then wipe off the excess. And again, you can be quite heavy with this and just get this all over the top and the sides. And don't forget to do these bits, the little kind of legs of your bridge, getting this into all the nooks and crannies. And then without washing your brush off, we're going to move on to Administratum Grey. And you want to be a little bit lighter with this. You just want this to kind of catch the most raised parts. So we're just going to gently do this, mainly around the edges. And again, making sure you get these legs of your bridge. You don't have to be too neat with this dry brushing because once we've done all of this and we've added the water effects and everything, we're going to be dry brushing the entire thing in another colour. This is just to kind of give you that base of what the ground and the bridge would look like, and then we're going to add the layer of kind of frost and ice afterwards. So we're moving on to Terminitus Stone now, so dry paint. And again, this is just to catch the edges and the most raised bits. Again, just making sure you catch the edges down here. You can see how this really brings out that contrast and makes all of the details pop. There we go. So, with the dry brushing done, the next step we want to move on to is adding the water to your little stream here. So, for that, I'm going to use Vallejo acrylic still water texture, and I'm going to use a tiny little bit of Green Stuff World Candy Ink Tiger Eye Brown. So as much as this is going to be quite a bright white icy look, it's also going to have that muddy look to it. So the water coming through this stream here isn't going to be clear. It's going to be ever so slightly muddy. So I'm going to pour some of my water texture into a palette. And then I'm just going to take my ink and give it a good shake. And we're going to use a toothpick to mix it. So as with most of my videos, don't forget your toothpick. So all we're going to do is literally add a single tiny drop. That's all you need of this ink. I was on the fence about buying these inks, and I decided to take the plunge last month, and I'm so glad I did, because they are great and they work really, really well in water textures. They're really great for adding colour to that. Because I find sometimes if you add paint to water textures, you lose some of the translucency, and they tend to shrink and crack more when they dry. Whereas with these inks, yep, as you can see, they take a lot of mixing, but once they're mixed in, it just gives that amazing hint of colour. So there we go. So then we're going to take a pipette, and I always squeeze the pipette really, really tightly so that I get as few bubbles as possible. So once we've got that full, so now we're just going to go over to the base and just start dropping this on where our stream is. Being very careful when you get to the edge not to break the surface tension, because as I've said in other videos, if you do break the surface tension, it all just comes spilling off the side of the base and it makes a big mess. So you're just going to try and get in there and plop this on. Making sure you've got it all the way under the bridge. And a bit more back on this side. There we go. So you just want to leave that to dry. And handy tip, when you're using this still water texture in a plastic palette like this, even if you add ink or paint or pigment or anything to it, leave it to dry. Don't try and wash it out. Just leave it, and within about 24 hours it dries solid, and you can just peel it out and it leaves no remnants whatsoever, and you're left with a nice clean palette. So I'm going to leave that water texture to dry overnight. And then we'll come back tomorrow and we will start making this look all frosty. So the water's dried, and what I did was, because it shrunk quite a bit, I added another layer on top once it had dried. So that's personal preference. It depends on what look you're going for. If you just want to leave it with one layer, that'll work just as well. But personally, I wanted to add an extra layer of the water texture. So the next thing we're going to do is try and make it look a little bit frosty. So for that, we're going to add a dry brush of Vallejo Ghost Grey. This is my kind of go-to colour when I want to make something look cold or frosty or anything like that. So I'm going to put some on my kitchen roll, and then just get some on my paper and brush most of it off. And we're going to try and hit everywhere with this. So we're putting a little bit on where the dirt is, and we're also going to hit the rock, but we're going to be very gentle and careful with it. So we're going to go around the edges, and then a really, really light brushing over the top. And then we're also going to add a little bit of this really lightly over where the water texture is, over the rocks, to give it that frosty look. So now we've done that, we can start adding some tufts. So what I've got here, I've got these just cheap dead grass tufts from eBay. So I'm just going to stick one of these on here. And then I've got some dead grass tufts from, not those ones, these ones, from Army Painter. So I'm going to put some of these on as well, just to give it some slightly different colours. That one there. Let's put some smaller ones on here. And then another tiny one. There we go. So that's now got some nice dead grass on it. So the next step is to try and make the tufts look a bit frosty. Now for that, what I'm actually going to use is super glue. And all I'm going to do is just apply a few blobs of super glue onto the tufts. Because what happens is, when the super glue starts to dry, it goes a little bit crystally. It crystallizes as it dries. And it will leave kind of frosty marks on the tufts. I apologise for the screaming. It's like a sweatbox in here, so I've had to open the window. And there are small children playing outside. So when that dries, as I say, it will give a frosty look to the tips of the tufts. So now to add the final layer of cold to it, if you like, we're going to make some icicles. And for that, you just need a thin plastic lid. I think I got this from a tub of hummus. And all we're going to do is I'm just going to cut the edge off, and I'm just going to cut myself a piece, small piece of this. So we've just now got a little piece of thin plastic. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some cutters, and I'm just going to cut some tiny, tiny slivers. Now, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do because they kind of tend to pop off, and so we're looking for something like that. Now, that's a little bit long, so I'm just going to cut that down like that. Maybe even more, actually. Let's get rid of some of that. There we go. So we've got this tiny bit, and we're just going to do about 3 of these. It is very fiddly. So then we'll just do another final small one. And we'll trim that down. It's really difficult to get these to the size that you want them. There we go. So I've got my 3 little shards there. I might even do 4. There's another one. And then this is where it gets really fiddly. So what we're going to do is apply tiny little bits of super glue just on the edge of your bridge. So like this, along there. And then take some tweezers and take your icicles, and you want to attach them and then push them slightly so that they're just hanging down, or they look like they're hanging down straight from the edge of your bridge. And then we'll put that one in there. And then we'll turn it round and we'll do the same on the other side. That one there. Use your tweezers and stick it on. They do tend to have a little bit of a mind of their own. It takes a little bit of practice. There we go. So we're going to give that a couple of minutes to dry thoroughly, and then we will come back and really make those pop. So now that the super glue is dried, we've got our icicles attached, and I don't know if this is going to show on camera, but the super glue that I applied to the tufts has done its job, and it's crystallized and just left it looking a little bit frosty. So the next thing we want to do is take some Vallejo water texture, the thick stuff in the tub, and we're just going to take an old battered brush, as small a tip as you can get. So I've got this one, and what I've actually done is I have coated this in some Broken Toad conditioning soap and left the soap to dry, so it's a very stiff brush at the moment, and I'm not going to wet it. I'm going to use this as a tool. I'm going to take out a little bit of the water texture, and I'm just going to apply it onto the icicles. And what this does is it just gives them a little bit more shape and stops them looking like a piece of plastic that's just been stuck to it. So we'll do that. And then I also like to draw a little bit of it across and bring a bit down, so it kind of looks a bit more like a row of icicles. Now obviously this is white at the moment, but it will dry clear. So we'll go to the other side and we'll do the same on here. And I like to use the plastic. You could just go straight in with some water texture, but what the plastic does is it just gives it a little bit of a structure to go on. Whereas if you did it straight with the water texture, you'd have to do a little bit, leave it to dry, come back and do a little bit more and leave it to dry. And you'd be looking at doing several back and forths with it. So whilst adding the plastic is a little bit faffy, it does save you a little bit of time. And just put some there. Along there. So when they dry clear, they're going to look like real icicles. And then, just as a final step to try and make it look as frosty as possible, I'm just going to go back to my dry brush and take a little bit of the Vallejo Ghost Grey on my brush, and I'm just going to add little bits to the tufts. Now this is very subtle and you probably won't be able to see the effect on camera, but when you do it, you'll see the difference it makes. There we go. So I'm going to leave that to dry, and then I will come back and show you how it's come out. So the icicles are nearly dry, but the problem with this water texture is that it does take anything up to 2 or 3 days to go completely clear, even with just a really small amount. But as you can see, you've got that effect now where it looks like there's icicles and ice dripping off the bridge. Now, I've painted the rim black as well, but that's completely up to you. You can paint it a different colour if you like. And you can see as well that because I've given this longer, the super glue has crystallised even more, so it's given a really nice frosty effect. Something else you can do with this one if you want is you can always add a little bit of my homemade snow as well if you want to make it a bit more snowy as well as just icy. And then the other option is to do a more summery version. So with this one, all I've done is skipped the ice step. So I've left all the tufts just their normal colour. But all I've done on the water is stippled on a little bit of very thinned white paint just to give it the illusion of the water running through the rocks. So those are just 2 of the different possibilities for this base. So there you go. That's how I make my frozen bridge base. So I'd love to hear what you thought about this video, so feel free to leave me a message down in the comments below and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel, and that way you will be made aware whenever I release new content. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram, and I've put the links down in the description of this video. So I will be back on Wednesday with almost an exact opposite of this one. I'm going to show you my simplest base to date. It's completely paint free, but it gives you some great results. So until then, happy hobbying.